All right, we'll get started with this webinar. The first thing is when this webinar topic was chosen and I saw an email go out for it yesterday. I was a little upset because I know this may seem like it only applies to people that are, in law school or graduating and that sort of thing. What I'm going to do today is I'll run through a lot of this topic in some without a ton of detail. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but it's an important topic, especially if you're a law student or a recent graduate and trying to get a job. But really what this topic is about on the 30,000 foot level is the rules that law firms have for the type of people that they hire. And so I'm going to, in this call, I will share a recent book that I wrote, and it's not a long book, and distributed to law firms that I've never shown to candidates about kind of some of those rules and how law firms should look at your resume when you're looking for positions and the kind of people they should eliminate. This is an important topic, and one of those rules, and in this presentation, if you're you may not think it applies to you, but I will tie in a lot of other topics as well relevant to people that are looking for lateral positions, and sort of some of these rules. Because one of the things that I don't like is I've been doing this for over 20 years, and each day almost I'm learning new rules about the type of people that law firms consistently don't hire. And it's usually not anything to do with where you went to law school. It's usually due to different types of choices that you've made in your career. For example, going in-house or taking a job with a public interest organization instead of a law firm out of law school, or taking a break, or having too many jobs. There's all these things that law firms look at to eliminate you from different positions. And it's important to understand those things. Now, not all law firms do that. And this particular issue of not holding a summer position is really most applicable to law firms that do work on behalf of companies and not individuals. So if you want a position with a firm that works primarily with individuals, this is not necessarily that important of a topic, but it is important to understand what you need to do to get employed by law firms that work on behalf of companies as opposed to individuals. And I will talk about other rules on this call today. Again, I apologize if you don't think this applies to you, but I'll make sure that I tie in a lot of different things so I help everyone that's on this call, not just people that this topic looks like it applies to. The idea, if you are in law school and you don't, or you were in law school and you weren't trying to work for a law firm, either as clerk or summer associate, it's really not a good decision if you're trying to be into a law firm that works on behalf of clients as opposed to consumer facing. So what does that mean? Law firms that represent businesses and typically will bill higher rates. Their attorneys typically are paid more. They can be large firms or small firms, but those type of firms typically will want you to have some experience in a law firm before they hire you. And those are also the types of firms that tend to pay the most. Now, they don't always pay market rate. Most of them actually pay below market rate because they're scattered all over the country. And market rate firms tend to be in large cities. But at the same time, if you want to work with one of those firms, they definitely want to see that you might have spent some time working in a firm like that, and especially in law school. A lot of attorneys do go to law school with the objective of not practicing law. But what happens is if you don't practice in a firm over the summer, it's citing the idea that you may not be interested in working in a firm like that. People take all sorts of jobs doing things that are unrelated to working in a law firm during the summer. And it's really pretty difficult to get into a law firm after you graduate if you don't have some experience in working in a law firm. The reason is because pretty much anybody that wants, if you try hard enough, can get a summer position in a law firm, or a position working for free even, or a position for $15 or $20 an hour. You don't need to get a position paying $4,000 a week. Any position you get that shows you're interested in working in a law firm, even if you're just volunteering your time, put something on your resume that shows that's what you're interested in. So law firms want to see people that are interested in law firms during the summer and not government, public interest, or working in a company because they want to hire people that show interest in that. And you think about it from their standpoint. If you work someplace in the summer in a law firm, you'll start understanding how a law firm works. And when you understand that, you're obviously much more suited to and much more of a proven commodity than someone that's taken a summer job in a public interest or worked on some campaign or something. Being tested in a law firm is very important. And it's very common for law students coming from the best law schools to work their summers in law, to work at big firms or small firms, but during their summers in law school. And it's especially important during your second summer because your second summer is something that really sets you up for getting a job in a large firm when you graduate, because you will have been a tested commodity. You may have gotten an offer, you may have not gotten an offer, but you have that on your resume that shows that you did something. Most legal hiring organizations will hire summer associates because what they want to do is they want to get a sense of your work ethic, how likely you are to get along with other attorneys, and whether they believe you are likely to make a valuable contribution. In addition, so what happens in summers, and it happens at every firm, there's always a couple people that just are not a good fit for the firm. Like they may have drinking problems that I've seen. They may behave inappropriately in a sexual fashion to other people. They may make a lot of mistakes. They may not work hard. They may talk behind people's back and other partners' back. They may do bad work. They may hurry. So all these things are what are being tested when you're as a summer associate. And if you don't get an offer after doing that, even if it's based on the economy, that's something that could reflect on your ultimate value to the legal market. Anything that is positive that's also a negative is something that will affect you in the future. So just think about it from the perspective of a future employer. They want to see that you've met these tests and you're able to sit down and do the work and understand what a firm is and think they have to think well of you. And honestly, there's a lot of competition for summer positions at the large firms. And it's actually just as competitive, if not more, than getting into law school, because now your grades compared to your peers are at issue, and not just getting into law school. And not only that, but you have to have a good personality, or one that the law firm thinks will work. And you have to have all sorts of things about you, meaning you have to not be, you have to have a good personality. You have to connect with your interviewer. You have to be likable. You have to have a good handshake, and all these sorts of things can impact. You have to be well groomed or to impact your ability to get a summer position. And it's actually much more difficult, especially with the large firms, to get a summer position than getting in almost any law school. So if you don't have a summer position, the problem is many legal hiring organizations will conclude that you weren't able to get a summer position, which is very common, or maybe you didn't have an interest in one. Both of those things are not good. And they're things that law firms will eliminate you for. Because there's other people on this call that probably are not summers, this doesn't apply to. What happens with law firms is it's essentially becomes an elimination game. So anything that detracts from how strong you look, how your interest, the level of interest, the type of work you do, your passion for a law firm, how other people see you, how you rate compared to other people that may have had a summer associate position. When you're in an early career, these are all only things they have to evaluate you by. You're evaluated by, if you went to some awesome college like MIT or something, they'll like that. But your law school also is something that you're evaluated by, because obviously going to a good law school makes you more attractive to law firms than if you went to a okay law school, because it shows that you were good enough in terms of your SATs and grades to get into one of those law schools. And you were willing to go to one of those law schools, probably without financial aid compared to other schools where you may have gotten it. So these kind of things show a lot to firms. But the next thing that you have to show is you have to show that you are interested in working in law firms, you made those kind of career choices. You got into the best firm you could, which also was another way of looking at you. You had the grades to get into those firms and the personality. So by the time you come up for a second year position, the market is acting on the limited information it has about you and making decisions about how valuable you are, which kind of stinks, but that's what happens. And that value is often based on your first semester grades in a lot of cases, and your second semester sometimes, usually. And so these are some of the more significant obstacles in terms of your ability to get a summer position, and then also to have an interest in one that you'll be overcoming. And then also because if you're coming from a top law school, it's even, this stuff is even more pronounced. And so these issues, as well as your strategy for getting a job, I'll address below. I just want to talk about real briefly some of the negative associations of networking during the summer. Also, this is a live webinar, so I'll answer as many questions about these three things, as well as any questions you have about, what I'm talking about. I'm also going to distribute, like I said, an ebook that I wrote for law firms that talks about some ways that they should be eliminating people and the type of candidates that typically don't work out. And this is one right here. Again, the perception is if you didn't work in a law firm in the summer, especially after your second year, future law firms will believe either you didn't get a position or had no interest in it. Both are bad. So again, if you had interest in it, you would have worked for free. You would have worked for a low amount of money. You would have gone out to find a job. You would have represented yourself in a way that allowed you to get a job. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is there are approximately 35,000 law firms in the United States. So they are everywhere. So you should be able to, whether it's emailing resumes, whether it's calling, whether it's writing physical letters, whether it's going to network events, if you really want to get a position, I don't care how well you did in law school. I don't care what law school you're going to. Anybody can get a position. And especially if you're willing to work for free or for a low period of money. Now, I'm not saying that I'm encouraging you to work for free, but what I'm encouraging you to do is I'm encouraging you to get something on your resume that shows you have an interest in working in a law firm, as opposed to going to work in the local union, which is something I almost did one summer. Or working in a public interest organization, or volunteering at some place that has nothing to do with a law firm. These are all things that people do. And when they see that on your resume, it's going to affect your ability to get into law firms that represent businesses. Now, why am I emphasizing working for law firms that represent businesses? I'm emphasizing that because for the most part, when you're working for businesses, you have the ability to spend more time on legal matters and do better work. The law firms are often supervised by general counsel, so they expect a certain standard of work. They bill a lot more money to the clients. They also will train their attorneys more. They're working on things where the clients have more of a budget, and often they're working on more important matters that affect lots of people. If you're representing individuals, you are typically representing people that don't have a lot of money to spend and need work done quickly. There's some other challenges when you're representing individuals. That is getting paid is one, because they often don't have the money, whereas businesses typically do. The jobs can be more volatile in terms of you may go to work for a solo practitioner doing immigration law or a small firm, and it's more likely to go out of business than a firm that represents businesses, because it doesn't have kind of cash flow coming in. So this is really more about, not just about trying to get, and again, there's nothing wrong with working at firms that represent individuals. Some of those firms attorneys make far more than even the highest paid attorneys in AmLaw 100 firms. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I'm saying if that's what you want to do, you're going to really need to be able to at least get a law firm on your resume, preferably one that represents businesses, if that's what you want to do. These are important career decisions that are made very early in your career. You are deciding between law firms that represent individuals and law firms that represent companies, between being employable by law firms that represent individuals as opposed to companies when you come out of law school, and what's going to ultimately happen to your career. Because law firms that represent companies do not hire people from law firms that represent individuals. Now, they do in some practice areas like trust and estates and to some extent, but in general, they don't. And it's very important to understand that dynamic. So if you didn't get a position in the summer, law firms will often assume that you are not able to get a summer position. And what that means, if that doesn't happen, you need to do a couple of things. The first thing you need to do is learn from the experience. Why did this happen? And then you need to go into future interviews and market yourself in a way that that overcomes these negative associations that it creates. Now, again, when I talk about learning from this experience, what I mean is you have to understand that you didn't do a good job marketing yourself. You didn't do a good enough job really doing everything you could and focusing on this. You didn't do a good enough job networking. You didn't do enough job. You didn't make that a priority. And again, you have to take the blame for this and be accountable, because there really are no excuses. With 35,000 law firms all over the country, it's not hard to get a position, especially if you're willing to work for nothing. Now, why would I say willing to work for nothing? Because that working for nothing, the small amount of money that you might lose working for nothing, 5,000, 10,000, could make the difference between millions of dollars in income over your career. So you should take that risk. And then if you try to get a summer position and did not, you probably have spent a lot of time thinking why this occurred. You may blame your grades. You may ask about that. Certainly grades have something to do with it and the quality of your law school. The reason for that is because those are things that impact your ability to get jobs at large law firms. And your ability to do that is just the difference between working in the largest firms generally and the smallest firms. It's not really that big of a deal. Another thing is being able to interview. You have to learn how to interview. There's a lot that goes into interviewing, and I'll talk something about that today. But when you go into interviews, your job is to really present yourself as someone that wants to work there, is willing to contribute, is not standoffish, is the kind of person that you would want representing you if you had a legal problem. A lot of times people don't get positions because they're too selective of the employers they approach. I remember when I was in law school, there was this thing called a NALP guide. And it basically, if law firms paid a few $1,000s, they could list themselves in it. So that basically contained, in Richmond, Virginia, it might contain 6 firms. In New York, it might contain 40. And Chicago, it might contain 11. But it's just not the universe of all the firms. Think about this. There's thousands of firms in New York. If you're just applying to NALP firms and you're not qualified to work in them because of your law school or your grades, that's just dumb. It's not a good use of your time. That's like playing the lottery as opposed to getting a job or doing something where you're getting paid. It's just, one is just completely risky. The other's not. But whatever these problems are, you need to fix them, because this is one of the most important stepping stones in your career. One thing that I definitely would do is I would spend a lot of time and effort, even maybe during the winter break of my first year of law school, after I'd taken all my exams, which should be your priority of everything when you're in law school. I would apply to a lot of firms for summer jobs after my first year and see if I had any luck doing that. You might not, but this is going to show you the amount of work that's required. How much work is required? A lot. At BCG, if we represent a candidate, we may approach a lot of firms to try to get interest. And when I say a lot of firms, it can be, in some cases, you're talking about quite a few. I don't even want to tell you the number, but it's a lot. And this is what you need to do. And you need to do the same thing as a summer associate when you're looking for a job. You need to apply to a lot of places, and you need to apply to places that probably other people aren't applying to, not just the big firms. And if you do that, you're more likely than not to have luck. If you just apply to a few places and take that as rejection, all that means is more highly qualified people are applying than you. So you need to find some places that will interview you and will value you. And summer positions are like law school. There's people that get jobs in the best firms and there's people that don't. But whatever job firm will have you is a place where you can start your career and hopefully do a good job there. And if you want, you can move up in terms of the type of firm you work at later. And really, your job is to overcome the negative associations of not getting a position then, because you don't want to create the kind of the perception that you did something that wasn't necessarily helping you in your career. Sometimes people will put things on their resume that they spent time with a parent, they did volunteer work in their summers. And that is probably not a good idea. You need to be working in those summers. So sometimes you can articulate reasons and for not working in the summer. Again, these are some reasons here. Taking time with a parent, doing a summer, these sort of things. But just think about it from the employer standpoint. Who would you hire? Would you hire someone that had problems that they had to address over the summer? Because those kind of problems are likely to take precedence again when the person starts their career? Or would you hire someone that was a summer associate compared to you? It seems pretty obvious to me that you would want to hire the person that did work someplace in the summer. Employers may respect what you did in the summer, and whether it was taking care of a family member or something, but at the same time, just put yourself in their situation when they're faced with two identical applicants, one that worked during the summer and the other didn't. And then if you didn't get a summer position and you have this on your resume, then you need to explain what you did in the summer in a way that's compelling. So there are ways to do that. There's people that are doing things like hiking between their second and third year, and they may have spent their summer working in a role related to the law in a business, all these sorts of things. I want to tell you kind of a quick story. I've got several of them, but this is just how serious this is. Two of my early hires, one of them was a guy that had gone to Columbia Law School, done very well there. He had almost like stereotypical nerdy look, where his pants are pulled up too high, but he was a very nice person. And I was like, wow, this guy can't get a job. What the heck's going on? And so I used to invite into my office to work for me and to try to give them experience people like him that weren't able to get jobs in law firms. And the first thing I would do is I would have them mail their resume out and their cover letter to hundreds of people. He chose firms. He chose only the most prestigious type firms or firms that had graduates of Ivy League law schools and stuff like he did. To my surprise, because he chose the type of firms that expected someone to be a summer associate, he didn't get a single interview and pretty much had a nervous breakdown type thing where he was questioning his identity, his why isn't he able to get a job when others weren't. And then he ended up working for our company, not in a legal capacity, but he learned how to program and started programming our databases. And then discovered another side gig building computers for law firms. And I think because they were law firms, he felt that he was connected to the law and continued to do that. And then eventually, because he was spending so much time doing that, I couldn't have him working in our company anymore. So that's the story. There's other stories I have, but once you're marked as someone that doesn't want to work in a law firm during the summer, it becomes very hard to get jobs. I did the same thing. There was a guy that had graduated from the top law school in California, I think Berkeley, Stanford, something like that, had gotten into Harvard Law School, but moved to the East Coast because he was from a very religious family and wanted to get far away from them on the West Coast. And then anyway, so he got into law school. He started law school when he was 18 or 19. I mean, he was one of these child geniuses. And then same thing, no job in the summer, brought him on to help him. He only applied to the firms that paid the most, didn't get a single interview, then worked for me for about a year and a half, not even in a legal capacity, helping with different things. And then made some mistakes and spent 5 years hiking around the country or the world with money he saved. And so no legal careers. This is serious. And the thing, you just need to apply to as many places. Now, I have a lot of success stories. I can tell you people that worked out for, but in general, a lot of people that I hired in the past to work at our company, just because I have a lot of respect for people that went to good law schools and any law school and tried, and were people that weren't able to get positions because they didn't get summer jobs. So I'm just with those types of firms. So if you go to a big law school like these people did, whether it's Berkeley or UCLA or Harvard is another one, and you don't work in the summer, for whatever reason, it becomes very hard to work in these big law firms that pay the most. And so it's hardest, by the way, for people that go to law schools where everyone expects them, where all their peers are getting these jobs in these big firms, and they're the only ones that aren't. So that if you go to a top 10 law school and you don't get a summer position, which happens to lots of attorneys every year, it just sends the wrong message to the market. And it's very hard to get jobs at the same level, paying the high rates that people expect to make. You have to go down in terms of the prestige level and then move up, which really isn't that hard to do, but you have to accept something less if you don't achieve it. My opinion, getting a summer job is very important. The other thing too is if you just take a summer job in a smaller firm, it's not really that big of a deal because you can interview with bigger firms in your third year, and you'll often get interviews to be hired for a permanent position. It's very common. The easiest explanation many times when you didn't get a job or you take other jobs is just, you said you knew you were going to spend your life practicing law and you wanted to take a summer to relax or do something different before starting your legal career. And a lot of employers will accept that. That'll be fine for them. It's a balance that's important to understand when applying to firms. The balance is you have to offer more to the firm than they're paying. So you have to have a balance in your favor. And that balance essentially means that you're willing to work someplace for less money, and they're able to find a better candidate than they might otherwise. And so there's that you should worry about. And the other thing that is important is your academic performance in law school. So a lot of people don't get the best grades and get very good grades and don't get summer positions, but they take other types of jobs. It could be working in the summer for a federal judge or working for a very prestigious public interest organization fellowship or something like that. So that can also help. And then the other thing that I just think is really important to note is that the practice of law really is like a race. And so just because you're not starting at the very apex of the legal profession, which really isn't that big of a deal, just because you're not at the very top, you have a long time to get to the top. And sometimes it's actually better for people to start lower because it gives them kind of more energy to fight and to do better than they might otherwise do if they didn't get a job at such a good firm. So what do I mean by that? There's plenty of people that go to big law schools and are very disappointed in themselves because they didn't get a summer job in a big firm, or they got a job in a firm that wasn't that prestigious, and they feel like they've been marked as somehow a bad person or tainted for the rest of their career. But that's just not true. If you work really hard at a firm and you learn a lot and you have a good school on your resume, what actually matters in the long run is your specialization in a practice area, which makes you rare and rare in the market. And people move up from small firms to mid-sized firms, from mid-sized firms to large firms all the time, because things like grades and stuff really stop mattering after a while. So you're in the legal profession, by the way, is a race. And what do I mean by that? I mean that I know attorneys that are practicing at the age of 85. Look how old the president is. Look how old Trump is. These are people practice for a long time. It'll probably be longer than even they're practicing. So if you got out of law school at the age of 25, you basically have about 60 years. And just because you don't get into a good firm in your summer and all these things happen to you, you can use that as do very well. What's interesting, I'll just say this as an aside. I'm in this business networking group. And in this business networking group, there's actually a lot of personal injury attorneys. And the personal injury attorneys own these law firms that generate millions of dollars in profit per year, and they do very well. But they're like, they all have a chip on their shoulder. They're mad because they didn't get into big firms, and they're mad, and they use that to kind of power them through. And so they're obviously representing individuals as opposed to companies, but it's pretty cool. So you can use if the good things don't happen to you, a lot of these very successful personal injury attorneys, just one example, use the kind of rejection and the disappointment to get back at companies and the types of lawyers that wouldn't have them. And so it's not none of this is the end of the world, but you need to use anything bad that happens to you almost like rocket fuel. You get mad and then you do better and you move forward. And law firms, by the way, love hiring people that are from lesser firms and that want to get ahead and are hungry, because what happens to a lot of attorneys that start out at the top is they take it for granted. They get a sense of entitlement. They bicker among each other about not liking the work or the conditions or partners, and the firms don't like them. The firms like people that are bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and trying to get ahead. So if you start at a lesser firm because you didn't have a summer job or whatever it is, you're going to be much better off in the long run many times, because you're going to have a lot more energy and really need to prove something to yourself in the world that other people might not have. And then also, you're more likely to be much more grateful when you get your first job than you otherwise might have been if you did not have a legal related job in law school. So you'll be excited about your job, you'll be motivated, and it's very good. This sort of rejection makes extremely successful lawyers. And as a matter of fact, I can tell you that some of the most successful attorneys that I know and I've run across in my career had rough starts, and they were continually proving something to themselves or their classmates in law school, or that they could achieve even though good things didn't happen. So I personally view these sorts of things when they happen to you as things that will hurt you in terms of getting into firms, but will also give you strength and power to push through and do the best you can in new places, and then try to prove something and then have more staying power in your career. So what do I mean by staying power? A lot of attorneys that get into the best firms, they stay 1 or 2 years and then they'll just do something else. So they'll maybe move firms a couple times and then that's it. But if you are hungry and you're trying to do something and you're putting all your effort into being the best and moving, that's a huge advantage. And you're more likely to appreciate when you get there as opposed to starting at the top of the legal profession. If you didn't have an interest in pursuing a legal related position, meaning in a law firm, and I guess I would even say otherwise during law school, you may have some people go to law school telling themselves they are going, but they don't want to be an attorney. A lot of people will work during law school and attend law school at night. So people that are mothers and have families, people that are engineers and make good money but want to become lawyers after, people that are accountants, all sorts of people have permanent jobs when they're in law school. I've met nurses, I've met company owners, I've met the number of the professions of people that go to law school are astonishing, because many times they're making much more money and arguably have more security than they'll ever have practicing law, but they still go to law school. A lot of law schools have night programs like Georgetown and tons of them. And if you're not interested in working as an attorney during law school, oftentimes you need to rethink a few things. If you came out and you weren't interested in being an attorney and you asked people, why now? You have to figure out the reason for that. But the ebook that I'm going to send, I'll put in the chat. I put it on Dropbox, and I'll also try to cut and paste it in the Q&A so people can get that. But people want to know that you're going to commit to a job, you're going to stay doing the job, and that's very important. And a lot of people, by the way, drop out of law school. I was in law school, and in our section, we had one class, I think, contracts with our section, and the teacher got up and made this speech about how you shouldn't be in law school and this reason. And one of the guys in our section closed his books, walked out, and no one ever saw him again, which is funny. So it's very rare that people decide they want to practice law a few years out of law school. When you do that, you need to do some real introspection. One of the things that kind of law firms are asking, and I always go over this in most meetings, but they ask, can you do the job? And they don't know because you haven't been a summer, you've never worked at it. They ask, will you do the job long term? And it's probably not, because if they were going to do the job long term, they probably would have tried it and committed to it. We don't know what they're going to do because they're flaky and they haven't done anything. So sometimes people have life experiences and they decide they want to work in a law firm. And if it's a case, I don't know that you want to emphasize in your job search, but I think one of the important ideas is if you really want something, then you go for it. I think if you attended law school with the objective of not being an attorney, this is going to be something that the law firms will think about as well. So you need to really come across in a competitive legal environment where there's a lot of competition for each job to someone that has a real kind of obsession for practicing law and is very interested in it. And you could get that obsession could hit you during your third year of law school. It could hit you when you're one or 2 years out of law school. And then you need to use that obsession to turn any interview you get into something that's going to get you a job. And when people see how serious you are, they want to hire you and they want to help you. But just keep in mind that all law firms, when they're hiring people to work with them, they want to hire people that are dedicated and are convinced they want to be attorneys. So when I joined the first law firm I joined, all these people in the law firm, the associates that were part of my class, several of them literally didn't want to be attorneys. And they'd gone to Harvard and Yale and all these places, but that's not what they wanted. And one girl that went to Harvard, just all she talked about was wanting to work in the U.S. Attorney's Office. Another guy that worked at Harvard wanted to start selling physical goods on the internet. And that's all he talked about. Those are bad hires for law firms. If you were a law firm, you would want to hire someone that's all they wanted to do because it's just a bad use of your money and your time. It's a bad use training those people. It's a bad use paying them because they're not going to be dedicated to it and give the clients good service. It's just a problem. Law firms don't want to hire people that may suddenly change their mind about working there. It's not smart. And you wouldn't do the same thing either. If you were hiring a gardener, for example, and the gardener showed up and told you, I'm doing this for a while and I don't know if I really want to do it. And then, or maybe didn't say anything, but you could see he wasn't really dedicated to the work he was doing. He was making mistakes. Some days he would be late. Others, he would only do half the job. You would get frustrated and get rid of that person. And that's how employers are. There's just so many people out there that are committed that you have to look committed. And again, if you don't want to be an attorney in law school and now you do, you're going to need to market yourself to employers in the same way. If you didn't get a position in law school, you're going to have to explain it a lot. You need to do so in a way that now makes you committed and give them the idea that you're committed to your work and have the potential to succeed. So what does committed to the work mean? So a lot of people, when they don't get jobs, will decide to go get an LLM. Other people that don't get jobs will give up and take jobs and again, I'm not trying to criticize people here, but they'll take jobs as contract attorneys in big firms when they simply could get a job probably as a regular attorney in a firm if they were able to search for a job. So people will do all sorts of things that will hurt them in the long run if they want to get a permanent job. And those sorts of things should become the focus of your search. So here's the best strategy that I recommend for getting your first position. And I'll talk a little bit about that. What I did want to just update people on too, as well, is that when there's not a lot of slides left here, and then I will go pretty quickly to questions. But yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about getting your first position, and then I'll go from there. Depending on the caliber of law school you attended, you're almost always certain to find something. I don't really think about grades too much. The reason most people don't find jobs, and again, this comes from decades of experience getting all sorts of people jobs, is you're just not being aggressive enough in your search. And what do I mean by aggressive? I'll tell you a couple of stories that I think are very funny. In Los Angeles, people are always trying to do entertainment law. That's like everybody wants to come do entertainment law in Los Angeles because they want to, whatever it is, it's the glamour of it. But there's people want to do it. So lots of candidates would always call our office and say, I want to do entertainment law. And there's always a few positions, but most of the time recruiters are not that helpful for getting people jobs as entertainment lawyers, because unless they're very specialized in entertainment finance and a few other things, but most of these entertainment firms are just overwhelmed a lot of times with applicants, but not all those entertainment firms are on the map. So I was sitting in my office one day and I used to have this company called Legal Authority. And what it would do is it would mail out all these letters to law firms in different practice areas for law students and practicing attorneys. And so it turns out in Los Angeles, there's a couple hundred firms that do entertainment law. So I had other people talking to the people, searching for firms based on their practice area and printing letters and selling the service and doing customer service. And I was just more involved with BCG, but I was offering this as a service to people. So I was sitting in my office and this father walked in with a guy and a young guy that looked like a law student and his friend that also looked for a law student. And he said, I can't thank you enough. My son got a great entertainment job for you. And so did his best friend in law school. And we really appreciate it. And I was like, wow, where'd you go to law school and how'd you do? And they both went to this law school. It's no longer called that, but it was Thomas Cooley in Michigan. That never been, it's a big law school, but it's never been a very highly ranked law school. And certainly relocating from a law school in Michigan and getting a job over the summer actually, I don't think it was a summer job, it was her first job, is pretty remarkable and would be remarkable if you went to Harvard. But the point is that they got these jobs in a very hard practice area because they just contacted through this service. And again, I'm not selling you the service because we don't do it anymore, but the contacted employers through this service and were able to get these jobs. So that's what I mean by the power of being aggressive in your search. Anybody that's aggressive can get jobs. Now, the examples I told you earlier, of the people that work for me that didn't do that, they only applied to the best firms. They didn't apply to all the firms. So any search you do, this applies to regardless of your seniority level, needs to be very aggressive. And you need to really find all the employers you possibly can. Giving up is a huge mistake. What do I mean by giving up? If you're an attorney and you're representing a client, you should look for every possible angle to win your case. That's what a good attorney does. If you're a law student or a new attorney representing yourself, obviously you should be looking for every single possible, or you're a practicing attorney, angle to get yourself a case, a job. You are representing yourself when you're looking for a job, and the results you get, I'm sorry, but they're the quality of attorney that you are or going to be, because you're not leaving any stone unturned and you're lobbying, you're doing all these things, which you should be expected to do as a good attorney for yourself. You need to represent yourself with enthusiasm, with being thorough with your research, with crafting good cover letters, with following up, with learning from your mistakes, with improving your interview skills, whatever you need to do, reading about interviewing, talking to people that have been successful, getting jobs when you haven't, and ask them what they're doing. There's all sorts of things that you need to do, and you should be doing regardless of your seniority level to make sure that you get a job. And this mistake that a lot of people make is they think that just because they're applying to these big firms after their second year, they're able to get jobs. No, most of those firms already have chosen their incoming classes from their second year, from their summer associates. That is probably off the table for you. It doesn't mean you shouldn't try to interview with those firms and apply to them, but it's probably not going to work. And most people at big firms, at big schools, at small schools, all are trying to apply to these major law firms to pay the most money. And how do you expect to stick out when you don't have the qualifications compared to the type of people that are working there, and then when they've already selected their classes? I'm not trying to not encourage you to try this, but what I'm saying is it's not a good use of your time to go after law firms that are unlikely to hire you because you're just spinning your wheels, and you should be focusing the types of firms that are likely to hire you. That's all. And you can certainly contact. Great things happen. Sometimes there's these miracles and you wonder what happened. I had this really funny thing happen. One of my first placements was this girl that had gone to University of Minnesota Law School, but was literally at the very bottom of her class. It was incredible. Like, she had basically all C's and then maybe a few D's, which were passing, and just this horrible transcript. Nevertheless, she got a position clerking on something like the Second Circuit, or I don't know, but some very prestigious judge. She got this job as a circuit court clerk, No idea how it happened. Probably the judge didn't ask for her grades, just assumed she was a good student because she went to there. And then after that, she got jobs at two of the most, I'm not going to say the names of them, but two very prestigious national firms and with C's and D's. So this kind of stuff happens. Like, it's not, you can get jobs in these big firms and sometimes mistakes happen. You just never know. But so it's important to do moonshots, of course, but the odds that those are going to work are pretty slim. You're not going to find most of your success, by the way, on legal newspapers or job boards. The reason is because if you are not a top student, or you didn't get a summer position, or you have other negative things in your background as a new attorney, you're just, if you apply to things on job boards and so forth, your ability to get positions competing with other people that may have better qualifications for company-facing law firms is pretty slim. Again, you can try it, but unless the law firm doesn't offer very much, meaning it pays horribly and it's not getting a lot of applicants, then that's going to be very difficult for you to get a job. Another thing I always recommend that works very well is certain professors in a lot of law school can provide recommendations to people inside that they know inside of law firms. I had one of the most bizarre experiences in law school. I was going to see a professor, like a pretty well-known professor, like nationally known, that is now the dean of one of the top, 2 or 3 law schools in the country. But I was sitting outside his office waiting to see him to ask some questions about a paper or something. And I heard him having a conversation with a law firm. And they were deciding whether or not to offer this student of his a permanent or summer position. And the firm was asking questions about these other firms who are interested in him, which the candidate, or with the woman that was actually a candidate, that apparently he knew. And meanwhile, he was saying, she won't go there. They're not going to make her an offer and you definitely should make her an offer. And so the professor actually knew people inside the law firms and was telling them, what to hire someone. That's incredible. So I never knew this kind of stuff happened. So it does. So you should definitely, to the extent you can, network with powerful professors and ask them where you would apply, and if you were me, and try to make them feel important, and that can do something. Also, I am a big fan of career services offices. Now, not all career services offices are great, but most of them actually have inside information on certain employers that will hire predominantly from certain law schools, and will do so consistently. So if you go and you ingratiate yourself, even as a practicing attorney, like 5-10 years out of law school, with the career services offices, they actually, some of them have a lot of power and can get you into firms that you normally wouldn't. I remember once I was hiring someone to work for me as a first-year attorney, and I knew that one of my former recruiters was working in the career services office at UCLA. In addition to that, I knew the director of career services office because I'd interviewed her to work for me before. So anyway, so I'm talking to these people and I asked them if they could send me some resumes of people that might be good to work for me as first year attorneys that hadn't necessarily clerked at a firm in the summers. And they turned around and they sent me, 10 resumes, but then they editorialized them and said, I think this person would be best for you. I really like this person. This person is best. And gave me all this kind of editorial about them. And that's the person I ended up hiring. So your career services office, if you ingratiate yourselves with them, can help you. Even stopping by every week and saying, is anything going on? And that sort of thing can be helpful. You should use all these sources. But in my opinion, the best strategy is really to just get out there and aggressively market yourself to every firm you possibly can. And again, I think last week I showed people how to there's a list of firms out there, but also how to find law firms using just Google. Like you can type commercial litigation firms in Saginaw, Michigan, and it will give you a bunch of them that wouldn't be on lists. The reason Google is actually very important to your search or good is because most firms are not in directories because directories cost them money. So they don't do it. There's, again, this is an old thing about legal authority, so I don't recommend that. But when you market yourself, you should do it all at once and contact as many employers as you possibly can, because you want to conduct You want to get a snapshot of the market at one time. And this, by the way, is incredibly effective. I remember one of my best friends was fired from an in-house job that he'd had for less than 6 weeks. And he'd come from a large firm, and he ended up mailing his resume to 1,000 companies in Los Angeles and 700 or 800 firms or something, and got numerous in-house jobs, which no one in their right mind would have believed was possible, because it's always very competitive for people to get in-house jobs. But he found places that could use someone like him. And not only did he find places that could use someone like him, but he also got lots of law firm jobs. And he took a position in a law firm where after 3 or 4 years, he became a partner and developed a large book of business. So good things can happen when you apply to a lot of places. And then also the ability to compare firms. So he got all of these in-house offers and law firm offers around the same time and was able to make a good decision. Whereas if he was just applying sporadically on job boards, it might have been a little bit more difficult for him. And you want to have often several options at the same time, instead of just applying to a firm, like 1 or 2 firms, getting one interview and taking that job. It's important to give yourself options. Now, I'm a firm believer in sending and applying to as many places as you possibly can, because it works. It's just you're sending applications to employers that may not have advertised, but when they see it, they think, wow, we could use someone like this. They're often flattered that you contact them, and it works. But the problem is most people don't do it. Sometimes career services offices will, as a general policy, tell people not to do it. Their reasons are often personal, meaning in protecting the school, because certainly if every graduate or every student in a school applied to 3,000 law firms in New York from New York Law School, that would really overwhelm the firms, and they may not want to see resumes from those schools anymore, because they'll think they're a nuisance. Whereas if people aren't doing that and they're taking advice, it's actually better for the school. So it's not always good for you. So I do recommend that procedure. It works. It's worked for 20 years, and I see it working all the time. It doesn't work sometimes if you're targeting firms there. It's hard to, but it's generally hard to get a position because they fill from summer positions, or they're large firms you may not be qualified to work for. So it's a difficult obstacle to overcome, not having a summer position. Everybody that graduates from any law school or that goes to any law school can find a summer position in a law firm, and also a permanent position in a law firm when you get out. You should not think that you need to accept certain things. Like, you don't need to be a contract attorney. You don't need to be a law clerk for 5 years and not an attorney. You do not need to do any of this stuff. It doesn't matter who you are, how good you think you are, how well you did in law school, any of that. None of that matters. Everyone that goes to law school and passes the bar can get a job in a law firm. It's just the only question is the kind of the ranking of the law firm, meaning in terms of, is it consumer facing? Is it facing working for big companies? I firmly believe that as a young attorney and as a law student, the smartest decision anyone can make is to work in a law firm. The reason for that is work is done differently when you're working for paying clients. It has to be efficient, it has to be thorough, it has to be at certain standards, because someone else is paying you for the work. If you go to work in the government, or you go to work in the public interest, or you teach, or you do something else, there's not that kind of market pressure on the type of work you do. So I think it's very important for young attorneys to do that. And I think most people, by the way, do not work at top tier firms that pay these high market rates. What is the percentage of people that do it? Maybe 2%, maybe 3%. So why would you put yourself in competition? There's 270 law schools. The number keeps changing. Sure, that people who go to the top 10 law schools have a little bit of advantage, but that's only 5% or something of all the law schools out there. And everyone there doesn't get a job. So you just have to understand that just because you don't get a job at a big firm this summer is meaningless, because, so you're not part of this 2 or 3%, big deal. Who did you score in the top 2% on your LSATs or on your SATs? Most people don't. So it's fine. But all employers do want to see, especially firms that are company facing, which is meaning doing work on behalf of companies. They typically do want to see you work in the summer. If you're watching this and you are a law student, I would recommend being very aggressive with your marketing of yourself. And whatever the reasons you didn't, you need to be honest and address it that way, and just approach it that way. That's it. I think the type of the way you approach this and the direction you go is going to have a lot to do with your career. So I think everybody should fight like hell to try to get into a law firm because of the training and the advantages of the rest of your career doing it. It's very difficult, by the way, to go back to a law firm after your career starts in kind of another way. So people start doing, working in the government or working in a company or something right out of law school. And when you do that, the presumption is that you don't know how to do law firm type work, and therefore it becomes very difficult to get hired by law firms in the future because you've gone down that different path. I don't think, again, it's your judgment, but I think often the best way to start your career most of the time is to work in a law firm because you're going to have a different type of career. Okay, so I'll just take a quick break for a minute or two, and then I'll come back and answer questions. I may also give a little bit of mini presentation about, in response to some of the questions, I prepared some things for you to read for this call. So I will try to put what I have into Dropbox and show you that, as well as an article. What I'm really trying to show you and this is for everyone on this webinar, is some of the ways that law firms use to basically not hire you, that are pretty common among all law firms, and that I think people should consider. And then just to everyone that's on this call that this may not have applied to, I certainly apologize. I was a little bit upset about that we were doing just this topic because it doesn't apply to everyone. So I do want to make it try to apply to more people the rest of the webinar. And then also, so I'll take a quick break. And then when I come back, I'll go into the questions and hopefully do a few more, give you guys a few more resources, and girls, a few more resources that can help you in your search. And then maybe if you have some questions about how to conduct an aggressive search, I can answer those too. So back in just 1 minute. Thank you. Okay, so this is a book that I'm going to share with everyone in the Q&A. I'll also put up the URL of it. But this is a book that we're sending out to employers on Friday. And every Friday, we tend to send educational type materials to law firms. And this is an example of something. But I'll send this to everyone because it's important to read this from the perspective of a law firm and what they expect what's important to them. I'm trying to blow this up. Let me just see if you can see it. Tool view, Zoom. Okay, so let me see. Anyway, I think this is probably okay. Okay, so this is something that law firms look at. And the main questions are, can you do the job? Can you be managed? Will you do the job long-term? Do you want the job? And do we like you? And so we'll discuss that. I would recommend, this is pretty long, but I'll share this with everyone that's on the call. And so you can understand the ways that law firms look at you. And again, these are all very important issues that law firms are considering when they're hiring you. And one of the things that I think is very important is, will you do the job long term? Meaning, does it look on your resume and when they talk to you, that you're committed to doing this? So what does that mean? It means that you've been doing the same thing and getting better and better at it for your career. So even when you're a law student, for example, if you went to college and you majored in nursing or some sort of or health care, I don't know, and then you did that as a job, and then you wanted to get a job as a healthcare attorney. People are looking for this kind of stuff when they're hiring you. And that's all, obviously, it's very important to understand. So these are just, and then being able to be managed. Does it look like you're willing to follow orders? Does it look like you'll do what's asked? It's very funny when you look at some of the most important attorneys in the country. When they have clients, they do what the client says. They say, sometimes they'll say sir and things to the clients. So these are all kind of important things. I'll put this in the chat. If you just give me a second, I don't know if there's a way to put these in the chat. Let me just see here. But I'll put those in the chat so you can let me just see here. I put in the Q&A, should work. Let me see here. Anyway, I'll put this in the Q&A, and then there's also this article right here that I like, which is another kind of way that law firms will get rid of people. So are things that they'll eliminate you on. And so this article I would look at. This article is about using a legal recruiter to find a position, but really what it's about are the reasons law firms will eliminate you when they look at your resume. So these things: are you currently employed by a law firm? Do you have stability working in a law firm? Are you admitted to the bar where you're applying? And all these sorts of questions that are really valuable to law firms when you're applying to jobs. So I just wanted to share that with you because I do feel it's important to understand all the rules that law firms use to eliminate you from jobs. And then being able to overcome those reasons is really something that is very strong and it's an important thing to do. Just one thing I'll just tell everyone as to start these questions. Sometimes people may be logged into Zoom and your name's displayed. I won't show your name so you can ask as many questions as you want. I'll just cut and paste by the questions in here so no one will see your name. Okay, so the first question is, this wasn't the first, it was actually the last, but we have. I've been working at branch office at a respected firm for several months. However, I've received an offer from a competitor that is larger and better in my field. The firm is larger, more profitable, offers more structured training, has more associates, and it's an office in my region that's been around longer. I want to take the better opportunity for training, could see the long-term opportunity there. Would I be making a mistake leaving? No. So that's actually a good question. So what happens, what law firms love to see, and this is very important, is most attorneys, by the way, most attorneys start out in large law firms. They'll move between similar types of law firms or they'll move to better firms. So if you have a better firm on your resume that you may have moved to, what that says is it tells the law firms that you're moving up and you're more in demand in the market. And that's very positive. So moving up instead of down is a really smart thing. It's something that a lot of people don't do. And also, it sounds to me like this is going to be better for your career in the long run. So I certainly would want to move if I was in your situation. And just keeping in mind that the best moves are moves to better firms. And so there's this kind of dynamic, which I would like to that I talk about. I have a long article on it that I'm getting ready to come out, but this is top 1/4 of 1% of all firms. This is like these kind of firms would be like, I don't know, Wachtell, Cravath, things like that. And then you get these, which are like your AmLaw 100 to 200 firms, which represent businesses. And these tend to be your middle market firms, which represent small to medium businesses. And then these are and I'll tell you why this makes sense in a second. And then this would be small businesses and mainly consumers. And then these would be with low budgets. And then these are individuals with low budgets. What happens with all of this is it's very difficult to move from a 4 firm to a 5 firm. Almost all candidates, almost all firms, these firms only hire summer associates, hire from summers. You cannot lateral to Wachtell or Cravath or something like that. They only hire from their summer program. Then your AmLaw 100 and 200 firms, there's different levels. So there's different levels of prestige among them. Some of the AmLaw 100 law firms and 200 would actually be 3 firms or even 2, because some of them do like insurance defense. But there's different levels of prestige among these. So it's important to really understand those different levels. And so it sounds to me like you may be at a 4 firm, but interested in a different level, a better firm, which is fine. But what a lot of attorneys do, and this is important to understand, and what anyone can do in their career, is you may start out at a 2 firm representing a mix of business clients and consumers with low budgets. You may do very well with those business clients and get good experience. And then if there's an economic upturn, there's an opportunity somewhere, you can get to a 3-firm. And then people from 3 firms actually move to 4 firms all the time. So there's really a path. Even if you start out at a 1 firm, you can often move to a 2 firm. So there's always a path for people to rise. And it depends on your practice area. Is it in demand? Yeah, it depends on your location, all those sorts of things. But the point is that there's always a chance to move up in terms of the prestige level of the firm you're at. And law firms love hiring people that have a pattern of moving up because it shows achievement, and it shows it's not like moving down. It shows achievement and commitment to the law firm and law firm employment. So law firms love that. And I think that it's a great question that you asked. Okay. So good. So next question. But these rankings of law firms, there's stuff on, are these rankings that this is a movement that I believe exists. Okay, what individuals should we be reaching out at law firms? Recruiters, partners, managing partner. I've not been able to figure out who they are. Any advice would be helpful. Okay, that's a good question. So when you're applying to small firms, it's typically the named partner, meaning the first name, the first last name, and the firm. So if it's Smith, Johnson or something, and Nesbitt, whatever, I'm just making this up, you would apply to Smith. So that's how that works. And that works, by the way. This is, if Smith is dead or retired, then you would apply to John. No longer the firm. So you would apply to John. So that's how that works. Now, a lot of firms will have, many firms will have emails like recruit, firm name, or whatever, stuff like that. So those inboxes are dangerous because what happens is a lot of times those resumes aren't even reviewed. So just imagine you were manning that email address and resumes were coming every day. You would not have time to review them all, nor would you want to. So they're just going into the ether. Now, there's nothing wrong in that case of, especially if it's a small to mid-sized firm, of emailing one of the named partners or something along those lines, because if the main partner walks the resume down or forwards it to the person that's manning the recruit email, it's likely to get more attention than it would just get if it goes to recruit because the managing partner is sending it down. So that's how that works. Those are the key people. So typically the named partner, then if there's no one listed on the website, which is quite often, you would want to email the person that looks most important. And in that email, you typically want to say something that differentiates your application from anyone else, something along the lines of, I'm looking exactly for a firm like yours, something that talks about why you would want to work there. So it's a great question. And then a lot of firms will have recruiting coordinators. Now, if they have a recruiting coordinator or someone in a formal recruiting position, but you definitely want to email them, because if you don't, it will create problems. People that are in recruiting positions inside of law firms are also often overwhelmed by the number of people coming in. Sometimes they have to add them into databases and all sorts of things. So it's a lot of work for them. And sometimes they have these ways of having to review resumes. It's just can be a very difficult job because they may have grade cutoffs. They may have all of these things that they need to follow in order to even forward the resumes up to people. So that can be very difficult. It's like one of the things that's very interesting is there's all these kind of very difficult to get in social clubs and things. There's like Soho House in Los Angeles. There's all these things that if you just try to get in without any help, you never will. But if people and you have relationships, then you will. What I recommend people do, if there is a recruiting coordinator, someone like that there, call the person up, tell them that you're very interested in the job, try to bond with them in some way if you can, tell them what you like about the firm, be very solicitous of just being nice and gracious, and ask them if there's anything that they need, if there's anything that's helpful. That makes them feel important and good, which is going to work in your best interest. So the better you can do with that, the better off you'll be. So making sure that you call someone often goes a long way. Now, you don't want to call a managing partner or a name partner saying you're interested, but the recruiting coordinator is definitely someone you can call, definitely someone that'll talk to you, definitely. They may not always be nice because they get a lot of calls, but it can be annoying, and they're human. They may be friendly, they may not be, but I believe that works very well because if they like you, they have a lot of control of who to send the resumes up and can make exceptions and all the sorts of things. I definitely recommend calling as well as emailing. A lot of times people don't want to call because they're very afraid of getting rejected on the phone. And it does happen. One of the worst experiences I ever had was I'm from Detroit, and there's this big firm there that represents General Motors, and it's a big important firm called Dyke & McGossett. And my girlfriend's best friend was a partner there, and I met him and I knew him briefly. I only met him a couple of times. And so I sent him an application in the mail and I was hoping to work there. And then I called him. It was the day after Christmas, and he was picked up, and I asked him if he received my application. And he basically hung up on me. He said, yeah, I just forwarded to recruiting and whatever. And then he hung up, and I was like, it was devastating. I was like, I still feel to this day, sometimes people aren't going to be nice to you, but you just have to shrug that off. Opposing counsel and lawsuits isn't going to be nice to you. People you work with, so you have to get over that fear of how people may treat you when you send applications and stuff. It's the people that do what others don't that typically are able to get jobs. So calling is something others don't, all that stuff. Okay, so as a 3L, should I only apply to firms and take the risk of not getting a job post-graduation, or should I be devoting energy to applying for government positions? For example, DOJ open position now and are likely to extend offers this fall. Firms may not want to consider me until next year. Do I not apply for a law firm? Yes, you can certainly apply to government jobs if that's what you want to do. There's a lot of positions in the Department of Justice in different areas, which can be like tax and civil rights. And there's tons of positions in the government. And those are often very competitive, and those can be good to get. The problem is once you go down that road, you'll have a very difficult time getting back into a law firm. So you're often much better off trying to get your first job in a law firm. And then to the extent it's not the best job, then move up after that. And really get that exposure. The problem, I actually was thinking about the Department of Justice the other day and how I felt working there. I worked in one summer in the main Justice Department in Washington, D.C., like their main building. It's huge. It takes up like a city block, and it's the Capitol. So I worked there, and it was amazing. Like people would filter in at 9 or 10, and then by noon, there was a cafeteria in the basement. Like everyone would go down there. And then they'd filter up, and maybe at 1, and then by 5, everyone was leaving. Now, it's not to say that they weren't working on important cases and that sort of thing, but it was just this very dingy, impersonal office with just a lot of light green walls and inexpensive desks. And I didn't think it was pleasant, and I thought the people almost just appeared most of them, not all of them, but just appeared like very kind of low energy. And so I think I would have learned a lot doing that, but it's definitely different than a law firm, because when you work for the government, there's not as much pressure many times to really throw yourself and work a lot of hours. And I'm not saying it's bad to work for the government. I think it's actually awesome. And I know the DOJ is extremely competitive, many different divisions, more so than most law firms. So those are good jobs and you can learn a lot. But the problem is once you do that, law firms presume that's something you would prefer as opposed to working for them. You had a chance to work in a law firm and you didn't really learn what it was like to learn in a law firm and work in a law firm, so that they'll hold it against you. And it's very difficult for at least from a recruiting standpoint, to place people that have never worked in a law firm, because there's just different types of training. There's different expectations. There's different pressures. There's just a lot of things that are different. And so that's the drawback. But yeah, if I was you, I would apply to DOJ, but I'd also apply to as many firms as you possibly can that you think might hire you. And there's the reason I talk about firms is because it's just a different level, a different type of training, and you want to get exposed to it earlier in your career. It's much harder to get into a law firm later in your career when you've never worked in a law firm, because you'll have developed all these habits and things. So what do I mean by that? Like in the DOJ, like where I was in the division I was in, people were arriving at 10, taking a 1 hour lunch at 12, coming back, just talking to friends on the phone and just dizzy, and then going back to work until 5. So that's not obviously what you would do in a law firm. Those sorts of habits are hard to break. And when people get into a law firm and they're expected to get in at 10 and work till 10 or 11, they simply don't want to do it because they've had something different and they don't like it. So that's what happens a lot of times when the law firms hire people from different non-legal positions. They're not accustomed to the hours. They're not accustomed to the competition. They're not in a law firm, by the way, you're competing with other associates to get ahead. There's competition. There's all these different things happening that wouldn't necessarily happen in a government job. So it's just a little different. So let's see here. These are great questions, by the way. Thank you. Honestly, I didn't expect so many questions because this was just geared towards law students that kind of, but I'm talking about other things. Have you noticed any shift in law firms' hiring criteria over the years, particularly in terms of their openness to considering candidates without traditional legal internship experience? That's a good question. I think that the way to think about the law, I think is important, is to everything that happens in the law is actually business driven. As a business, businesses are interested in getting the best possible product and purchasing the best possible waiver at the lowest cost. What does that mean? It means that if you are willing to go down in terms of the prestige level of the firm you're working at, you can always get a job. So it doesn't matter your traditional legal experience. These firms will always hire you. You can always get a job in them. I'm not kidding. I'm literally not kidding. Recently, and we're talking about 2023, 2 weeks ago, I've seen firms at this level pay full-time associates $45,000 a year. A lot of them, even in LA, will pay 60, which is astonishing, but that's what it is. Now, at that level, some of them will pay 150. It's not uncommon. I've seen one interesting one is like lemon law, which is, I don't even really understand what it is, but that would be considered a one. I've seen some of those firms pay seasoned attorneys $300,000 for 8 years of experience. So there's definitely different tiers in what they pay. But my point is that anyone that wants to can get a job at a one firm, because the one firms will hire you cheaply and they can make money off you. Same thing with two firms. So anybody can get a job at one of these firms. It's just you have to apply to enough of them and be willing to accept a low enough salary. And let me just say, but salaries, having a job and getting trained is better than not having a job and not getting trained. People go to work at personal injury law firms and these sort of things all the time. And then they start their own firms and with what they learn and make just incredible amounts of money. So you can always do very well with that, wherever you start. But I think you're always better, even if you don't have the experience, you can always get a job. The reason is from a business standpoint, these law firms will hire the lowest possible, will pay the least amount of money and try to make as much money as they can. At some point, like you're making them far more money than you're getting paid. You can demand a raise, you can move to a better firm. That's just how it works. But there's plenty of people out there that essentially will be willing to exploit you for the right amount of money. Arguably, a rank 4 firm that's paying you $200,000 a year and billing you out at $500 an hour, and you're working 2,400 hours a year and bringing in $1.2 million in exchange for $200,000 is exploiting you too. It's just how it works in all the firms. It's really the level of exploitation that you're willing to accept. One thing I read yesterday that was shocking to me and was the average salary. I can't believe it, of a UPS driver. I told my kids this at dinner last night, and it's just incredible. It's $170,000 a year. So it just really gives you some perspective. How bad do you want it to practice law? I know that's all they ever make, but obviously that's pretty shocking, especially when they don't have to go to law school. I'm assuming no education. And that's what, there's no special education they need to have or anything like that. Okay. And I hear stuff like this all the time, and people just making incredible amounts of money doing these jobs you would never expect. Plumbers making $500,000 a year. And it's just, wow. Okay, so soft skills are, I think it's useful to go back to these reasons, which would be, can you do the job? Which is, you have to portray yourself as someone that can do the work and is competent. Will you commit to the job? Meaning, is this something that you want to do long term? Can you be managed? Can you be managed? And a couple other ones here. Let me just see here in a second. Sorry, just 5 of them. I'm just having a little bit of a brain fog at the moment. Let's see here. Okay, so it's, let me see here. Can you be, do you want the job? Do we like you? Do we like you? Can you do the job it should be pretty self-explanatory. Do you have the experience? Do you have the education? Do people with similar backgrounds as you, are they able to do well in the position? Is there some sort of, history of people with a background similar to yours doing well there and that sort of thing? So that's really the first thing. Obviously, if you went to a lower ranked law school and didn't do that well there, you can't get into an AmLaw 100 law firm right away because they're going to think you can't do the job because of your background. Committing to the job means there's something, and this is, this is a soft skill in some respects, meaning they want to believe that if they hire you, it's something that you're really going to commit to and try hard at, meaning you want the job. There's things in your background that suggest you'll do well and commit to it. Meaning if you were I remember my wife her father had been sued in a big trademark case and were for trademark infringement and had this huge judgment against him of $15 million or something and had to file bankruptcy and all this bad stuff. For her, like, she loved her father very much and was a very good daughter. And so she had the story like, this happened to my family and I really wanted to be a trademark attorney. She took her first summer job as a trademark attorney. And then her second summer, she did it. And then somehow, even though she worked in a big firm, her second summer got a job at one of the top IP firms in the country because she just had this whole thing where it was pretty obvious that she would commit to it for those sorts of reasons and had a really good story. So they were like, wow, this person really wants to, and she went to top 50 or 75 law school. I don't think there's anything remarkable about her grades. I don't know actually, but anyway, the point is that if a law firm thinks you're going to commit for reasons in your background, meaning I don't know what it is, you grew up on a coal mine and I don't know, but something that makes the job that looks like you'll commit, there's something in your history that shows commitment. So things in your history that show commitment would be having had previous jobs for a long period of time. A lot of times law firms like it when you're married, when you buy a house, when all those sorts of things, because it's a form of commitment to something. And obviously someone with a house and a family and children is likely to not bounce around between jobs because they need to support them. So that's important. Being managed is also a very soft skill, but essentially what that means is you will follow orders, like you will do what's asked of you. Like you won't question your superiors, like you'll get the work done and you'll basically be what's called a soldier, meaning that's what law firms want. They want people that are going to do the work. There's tons of people that can't be managed. They won't follow instructions. They'll question the ethics of the firm, giving them certain types of work. They'll raise all sorts of concerns to superiors. They may have sued people in the past. There's a lot of people that aren't manageable and people won't hire based on that. So you need to show that you follow instructions, that you're willing to do what's asked of you, that it's important for you to learn and follow. People want to see that. And then the next one is wanting the job. And that's just extremely important because there'll be people that walk in and they expect the employer to sell them, or they're wishy-washy, or they make offers to people and those people come back wanting counter offers and make things difficult. So wanting the job is, if you have reasons for wanting to work there, it's a better firm, or it's strong in my practice area, or this is my dream job. And this is what, all those sorts of things make a huge difference. And then of course, being likable is important too. If they like you, meaning you connect with people, then you're more likely to get the job. There's a lot of, in terms of being likable, there's a book that's very famous called How to Win Friends and Influence People. I haven't read it, to be honest with you, in 20 years, but it's a great book. And it talks about how to be likable, meaning you're not critical. You're always very positive around people. You don't criticize things or people. You use people's names a lot. There's a lot to that book, and I'd recommend reading that. So these are all kind of the skills that you need. This is what gets jobs, and it's also what doesn't get jobs. So I would recommend reviewing all this. So you do these things and you stand out. Most people don't. And that's why when they interview, a lot of people don't get positions they normally should. Okay. I mentioned you do a training on how to locate various firms in the area. Okay, let me just pull up this. If you go to Google and then this is something anyone can do. It's actually very easy. Google, by the way, I'm extremely impressed because what happens is most law firms are not listed in directories. So like lemmings, everyone goes to these directories and sends applications to the same place. I would estimate, I don't know what the percentage is, but I would estimate that probably 8% or 90% of law firms are found by Google, and they're simply not in these directories. So it's incredible because Google's crawling all these things, is classifying it. They've got thousands of PhDs working there. Whereas these directories are just cold calling law firms and asking them if they want to pay $500 or $2,000 to be in the directory. Obviously, something like Google is going to be where you go tax law firms, and Memphis, I don't know, Memphis, Tennessee. I'm just making this up. Who knows if there are any, but I bet there are. And so you'll get these kind of links like this where you'll see everyone that's doing tax law in Memphis, and it just keeps going. It's got pages and pages. And this is Memphis. Come on, it's not here they all are. These are all the firms. You're not going to find anything like this anywhere. If you were to do personal injury or corporate law firms in Omaha, Nebraska, it doesn't matter, anywhere in the country, Omaha, Nebraska. You're going to find all these. It's incredible. There's so many freaking opportunities to find jobs. And these are injury attorneys, obviously, but here's a real estate, and you can look at these. It's not always perfect, but it's always pretty good. So this is Crucker Huck. I've never heard of them. Then they have an opportunity section for an Omaha transactional attorney. This is so easy. All you need to do is just do these searches and then pull up these firms and find these jobs. I didn't make this up. I just did this in response to your question. I pulled up a random job in Omaha, and I could probably pull up 20 or 30 more if I wanted to. So not only there are opportunities, but there's firms you wouldn't find anywhere else. It's incredible. So why wouldn't you do this for your job search? It's 1,000 times more effective than, I hate to say it, it's more effective than Indeed. We have a site, Law Crossing, where we find jobs like this, but certainly with hundreds, if not thousands of cities in the United States, it's very difficult for us to find all these places. You need to do this. And this is how you search for jobs. Honestly, this is not complex stuff. You can go here, you can go, let's see, personal injury. I just saw a show about how Flint, Michigan is like this complete meltdown, but even do I connect with it? And does the firm have a lot? And are they getting? So I was practicing, second firm I practiced at was named Dewey Ballantyne. And it was the Los Angeles office of a New York law firm that was paying New York rates and all these cool things. There was one partner there that was just incredibly toxic and undermined people to such a degree that after they worked with her, they would quit. And one woman became a waitress, another person, the woman I'm thinking waitress went to Columbia Law School. All these awful things were happening to the people, and people were leaving, and bad things were happening to them just when they were leaving. So some law firms, this is what happens. So you have to understand that question. The connection is important because when you go into law firms, you can feel the atmosphere that they have, and sometimes that atmosphere and energy will either turn you off or you'll feel comfortable. And I think that's a natural thing. When people get together, there's a certain type of energy that's thrown off. And based on that energy, you're going to either be happy there or not. So you need to figure that out. And then, but the most important thing, this is really the most important thing, is if the law firm has access to a lot of work. So what does that mean? That means that there has to be a lot of work coming in, and the work that hopefully the law firm should be growing and getting more work, not shrinking, because that's a sign that the market likes what the firm's doing. It's also a sign that you're going to have a lot of employment stability, because what happens, slow firms let people go, protect the work. So partners try to do it all themselves. And they are scary because you never know what's going to happen to you. And so they do things like they give bad reviews, let staff people go. And they're just scary places. And there's a lot of firms like that. So you have to understand that. And then busy firms, growing firms, try to keep people around because there's so much work. They advance people, partner and stuff, partners, and they increase pay and they give great reviews to hold on to people. So these are two separate firms. And so you can analyze firms and get a sense of who's busier, and these are very important questions. I can't emphasize enough how bad it is if you go to a slow firm because the firm doesn't seem to be growing, or maybe they hire you to work on one client. There's all sorts of things. So slow firms are dangerous. Many times, by the way, slow firms are branch offices of bigger firms that aren't able to generate their own work. And that's because they tend to hire laterally to start those businesses. And a lot of times the partners are hiring laterally are people that were having problems at their existing firms. There's just all sorts of things going on. But these are some questions that you should ask and think about. But that connection is very important. And I think that to me sounds like it could be a good thing for you. Wow, these are just a lot of great questions. Thank you, everyone, for asking this. I was thinking that because of this presentation, I would be out of here within pretty quickly because I didn't think there would be so many questions. Okay, let's see. Okay, I lost my position in a small firm my first year of practice, but got into a better firm. It was ultimately a blessing in disguise, and that small firm turned out to be in serious distress. Exactly. So just everyone, what this person is saying is always true. Law firms that lay you off or give you a really hard time, that only happens most of the time when they're scared and they don't have enough work, but they want to blame you because they don't want to look slow to the world or the market or other attorneys. With this episode of being fired in an employment gap of a couple months before joining a large and far better firm continue to haunt me, and how should I explain it all? You can put down the month of your leaving. You can say that you were working really hard and wanted to take a few months off. You can say that the firm that hired me gave me a later start date. You can say that there's all sorts of things you can say, or you can just list the years of you were at some place when you get later in your career. You can say I was at this place 2022 to 23. I joined this firm in 2023. I was there in 2028. And so I don't think being fired is necessarily something that you need to talk about. In general, just so you understand, when firms are interviewing you laterally, they really don't care. They're trying to make money. So if something happened at your last firm, they're not going to care. But one of the questions that I went over here above is, will you commit to the job? That's really what law firms want to see. So if it was me and I was at this new firm, what I would do is I would try to stay at the larger firm as long as you possibly can, unless you're moving to a larger firm. Because the most important thing that law firms want to see when they're hiring you is if you stay a long time, that means a lot of things. So it means a ton of things. This means that you can get along with people, your work's good, there's continuity with our clients. Meaning the clients don't have people leaving all the time. You're loyal, all these sorts of things. So these are really good things. So attorneys that are able to stay at law firms for a long period of time are much more marketable in the future and have a lot more options and tend to be more trusted at the law firms are at. And because they're more trusted, if they stay a long time, they learn a lot more. So my advice to you would be, I would stay at the firm you're currently at as long as you can, because otherwise you're going to look very loyal. It'll just help you in terms of future, being able to get jobs in the future. It's just a smart thing. The longer you stay at a firm, the more loyal you seem, the more likely you are to make partner, the more likely you are to get inside information. There's just a whole different bunch of things. Okay, so this is about international students, and this is a good question. So what happens every year is thousands of international law students come to the United States to attend LLM programs. And many of them have worked in top US or international law firms in their home country, but they come to the US with a hope that getting an LLM will entitle them to or get them positions at US law firms. And unfortunately, they might get a job that lasts for 1 year. It's called a international fellowship or something at a top New York firm or a top firm, or they might get a position. Generally, the positions they get are in things like international arbitration, of which there's not a lot of those openings. But it's difficult for them, international students, to get jobs at U.S. law firms after an LLM because they typically need to be sponsored for visas. And law firms believe that those attorneys will often, more likely than not, go home after they're at some point because their family and their whole social network's there. So it's very risky. Law firms are very much, and again, it's sad because there are thousands of people that go to these LLM programs, and I see hundreds of these resumes per week. And they typically go home, they take the New York bar and then try to apply to firm in New York. And honestly, it rarely works out. If you were a US law firm and you had your choice of hiring someone where you knew they would stick around, and that you didn't have to sponsor them for a visa and so forth, you would be much more likely to hire the US attorney. And that's what happens. So if it was me and I was an international student, I would maybe try to get a position in a U.S. law firm for maybe 1 year. Typically, the best practice area to do that in is capital markets. So you learn U.S. capital markets and then go back to your home country and have an understanding of that and help companies in your own market that are trying to raise money for through stocks and different things. So that's smart, but typically, I think the smartest thing for you to do is to try to work in your home country or a country in your region. If you're from Ireland, you could work in places in England and other countries around Europe or if you're so that's really the smartest thing to do generally, and then use your LLM for that. But it's very hard for foreign attorneys to get LLMs to stay in the US. Now, some of them do something that's very smart. They get JDs in addition to LLM. That's typically what the law firms want. Once they get that, if they somehow get US citizenship or they marry someone or whatever, then they become all of a sudden quite marketable, just like a US attorney, where their grades and everything are what are factored in. So those are some of the ways that works, but generally it can be pretty difficult for people to get those types of jobs. Okay, a lot of great questions. This is amazing. Okay, so law firms that align with your strengths and experiences are typically, the best way to identify them would be just the type of work they do. So type of work they do and the types of attorneys they hire. Types of attorneys that work there. That's really pretty much it. It's less about your experiences and more about your strengths. Once you go onto Google and you research all these different firms and you understand ones that you look for people that look similar to you, in terms of law schools and life experience, and just place people that you think are like you. And when you find that, you apply to those places and you're more likely to get hired. So if you went to Stanford Law School and you start applying to firms where everybody went to third tier law schools, those people are not going to be interested in you because you won't make them feel good about themselves. You would have to apply to firms with people similar to you. Or if you're doing insurance defense and you want to do commercial litigation, you have to maybe apply to firms to do both insurance defense and commercial litigation. You can't just apply to commercial litigation because you're doing a different type of litigation, essentially probably defending insurance companies against claims by individuals. And so you have to figure all that out. But generally, what I shared up here was these different types of firms. So you have the 1 firms, the 5 firms. And so you have to try to apply to firms that match what you want to do. Essentially, what's important to understand is these firms are going to be always the hardest to get into because they represent companies. These ones are going to be the easiest because they represent individuals. They won't pay as much, but they'll give you experience, and that's more important than anything. All of these firms, by the way, like you could start out doing immigration law. You could start out doing, it doesn't matter what the practice area is, and you can become very successful. Everybody that becomes, it doesn't matter, but it's important to apply to law firms that where you're likely to get hired, there's people like you. It's very difficult to jump into certain types of firms if you don't have the type of experience they're looking for. As a consulting forensic electrical engineer, I've worked with lawyers involved in patent infringement, product liability, heavy manufacturing, and medical equipment, domestic forensic product. I'm sorry, I'm going to read this. As a consulting forensic electrical engineer, I've worked with lawyers involved in patent infringement, product liability, consumer electronics, high-tech microchip equipment, heavy manufacturing machinery, and medical equipment malpractice, both domestically and throughout Asia, including additional experience in laboratory forensic failure analysis. Can I be a possible fit in a technical consulting advisory role, including an offer to a second option with an ongoing case? Yeah, so you can be a technical expert, and people do hire technical experts, and law firms do. But what I would suggest, if you want to have a long-term position in a law firm, rather than being a forensic expert, you should become a patent agent. So patent agents are basically able to do pretty much everything a patent lawyer does, and they're much more employable. So you can take your experience, and if you want to get a job in a law firm, you can become a patent agent, and they can pay very well. They can pay more than $300,000 a year in some firms. So being a patent agent can be a very good career. And then in terms of technical consulting, the problem with that is that's generally going to be short-term type positions. And so with short-term positions, you're going to be always scrambling for work and moving from case to case. Whereas a patent agent, you're always a profit center for the firm. That's what I would recommend. As an electrical engineer, you're actually able to take the patent bar, and you will be marketable to law firms once you do that. Sometimes you go to work for the government. There's in the USPTO, which is, by the way, what Einstein or his career started, was in the German equivalent. But I would recommend, hopefully, potentially, trying to be a patent agent when you start. I think that if you want long-term work. If you want to be a consultant, there are advertisements for technical consultants and stuff on BCG. I've just found that those are a little bit difficult to get, and they don't have ongoing income, which you could get as a patent agent. Okay, I'm currently licensed to practice law in 3 states. When I began a third tier law school, but I ended up graduating with a JD from a top 20 law school. Congratulations, that's amazing. After I went through an LLM in another top law school, I found out what was missing to pass the bar exam. I ended up passing the UVE with a high score after my LLM. After completing an LLM and passing the bar, I now feel confident to be able to work in a law firm. By the way, I'm a registered patent attorney. Nice. Okay. But my LLM related to ADR and business law. I complete my LM top 10%. I send out so many resumes, but not much. Okay, so here's what you do. If you let me just see. So I just want to make sure I read this again. I can understand it before I answer it. Oh, you're a registered patent attorney. Okay, so what I would recommend, how do you do that? This is very interesting of what happens to patent attorneys. So there's an article on BCG called Why Law Firms Have No Idea How to Hire Patent Attorneys or something like that. But what typically happens to patent attorneys is patent attorneys will start out at small law firms. And the reason is because it's very hard to get hired at top law firms. Most patent attorneys, because they're engineers, they work during law school, or law school is just a little bit difficult for them. So they end up they end up taking jobs that aren't as good, but then they move to top law schools later. I'm not sure why you got that LLM. You can certainly leave it on your resume that and say you might be interested in patent litigation or litigation or something in the future. But if it was me, I would apply to small law firms to do patent prosecution or patent litigation, and you will get a job. Because what happens to most patent attorneys is they start out at small law firms because they just don't have the grades and all that kind of stuff that people generally need to get into large law firms out of law school. It's actually almost always happens. It's not the exception, it's the rule. And then when they get the experience writing patents and so forth, they go to larger law firms. Now, there's another point that's important to understand. Large law firms are actually shying away, and have been for years, more than a decade, from doing patent prosecution. They do them, Morrison and Forrester, and there's a lot of huge firms that do them. But the problem with patent prosecution in large law firms is smaller law firms typically do them on a flat fee basis, and large law firms will often bill by the hour. So the law firms billing by the hour makes everything a lot more expensive for the clients. And so most of the time they'll send work to a lot of smaller firms rather than large firms. But small firms, there's firms of 3 people that do patents for Microsoft. So that's what I would do. The LLM is fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's just be better if it was consistent with what you're doing. But I feel confident that if you pass the patent bar and you're a registered patent attorney, then that's what you should be doing, because there's very few attorneys that are patent attorneys or majored in sciences and then are even qualified to do patent-related work. 1 second, I'm going to grab some. Question here. I believe I am working for a crazy partner, like you said. She constantly forgets every deadline, asks to review work before the deadline when it was submitted weeks ago, and then acts like someone else drops the ball, forgets to provide instructions or edits, and then gets mad if it's not done without noticing anyone. I don't want to end up like these people you described who ran out, but I need to deal with this so I can protect my position. She's very influential. What do I recommend? Yeah, so there are people like that, and they're dangerous. And the problem is other attorneys and senior attorneys in the firm generally know who those people are, and they condone it because those people may have large clients or be generating a lot of business for the firm. So there are people inside of law firms that consistently throw associates under the bus, and that becomes a problem. So what do I recommend? I think that you have a couple of choices. What I would recommend would be you can do your best to anticipate the issues that she has and not get mad at her and be respectful and try to turn that around and make her like you. That's probably unlikely to happen, but you can try. But what I would recommend is trying to get work from other people, and to the extent you can, then try to phase out, have her try to work with her as little as possible. If it gets very serious, then you can, maybe some firms have mentors, and you can bring it up without using her name to your mentor, or sometimes you can bring up the issues quietly and in a way that doesn't create a lot of tension with some other partners in the firm. I've seen associates that are dealing with that sort of stuff go to the head of the firm and be like, I can't work with this person. I'm concerned about my future. And they will actually fix it and sympathize with you. So you have to figure out how to deal with it. It's very difficult. And so people are forgetting deadlines. You should try to document everything. It sounds like what's going on. You have to do your best to document everything. One of the things about partners like that is if you do figure them out, then they can actually be your biggest ally. And they'll teach you a lot of ways, a lot of things that you might not otherwise learn in your career. And they'll show you, they'll give you a very good grounding to succeed. Let's see. Okay, so this is another question that I've probably already answered before when I talked about the LLM. But this person says, what if I didn't do a summer internship because I got a degree in a foreign country, went to U.S. law school to do my master's in law, and then my experience doesn't translate in the U.S. Yeah, so again, this is a problem. I don't want to be critical of law schools, but LLMs are kind of money machines. They can put you in a classroom with 30 other people, and you can it's not a lot of money for them to run you through an LLM program, and they will get a lot of money from you, maybe $100,000. So it's a business, and it contributes to the bottom line of the schools. But the problem is it's very difficult for people that aren't educated in the U.S., if not impossible, for you to get a position in the U.S. because you'll need to be sponsored. You don't have a summer job. You don't have a JD. The JD allows them to compare you to other people in your class. Everyone typically gets good grades in LM programs, just as they do in most master's programs. It's very difficult going to the US with the expectation that you're going to get a job. It doesn't really work. Now, sometimes it may, I don't know if you're from an Asian country or a US country, sometimes it does work for certain types of attorneys. It could work for Australian attorneys. For example, a lot of the firms there are very comparable to the US. Sometimes it can work for attorneys from the UK. Attorneys from the UK rarely come over. I don't know why, but a lot of Australians do. But it's very difficult unless you have experience at a US type firm. And it's very difficult for people to get summer internships or get jobs in the US. It's unfortunate. So many people are in that position. But if it was me, I would use the experience I got to go back to my foreign country and see if there's some way you can offer that to firms. So given my lack of traditional legal internships, I've taken a freelance research project to build legal skills. Do firms appreciate this initiative, and how can I showcase this project in my resume? Okay, that's good. There's lots of people that haven't taken real jobs inside of law firms to do freelance legal research. The problem with doing freelance legal research is if no one's supervising your work and you're just doing what you're doing, then you may not improve. And so a law firm is going to require a little bit different type of skills. What I would recommend, you can certainly have a section that calls about freelance legal or legal research projects and talk about those, and then apply to law firms. But again, what I would recommend doing is applying. If you didn't get a legal internship, these firms in red are always going to hire you. You can get a job that just won't pay as much, and you will get experience in a law firm. That is what I would recommend. These firms are not difficult to get jobs in. And when I say they're difficult, they do have to have the jobs, and the economy they're in has to have the work. But you can always get jobs in these. So you should not take a legal research position because you feel like you can't get a job. Anyone can get a job. I've shown you that in every city in the country, there's multiple people, if not hundreds, in every practice area. So it's really not that difficult to get a job. I don't think anyone needs to take a job as a contract attorney or freelance legal researcher. I think you should be inside of a firm. The reason you should be inside of a firm is you're going to see what the real world is. You're going to get exposed to real clients, and you're going to be exposed to the pressure of working in a law firm. And you're also going to be able to work with attorneys supervising and criticizing your work, which is going to make you grow. And then you're also going to see how the legal business works. I believe it's extremely important to be working in a law firm as opposed to doing these jobs. I don't really know why. I do know why. I know why people take these sort of jobs is because they don't see the tremendous amount of opportunity out there, but there's opportunities all around you. I grew up in a town of 25,000 people, and there's 30 law firms there. I had no idea when I did a Google search. There's law firms all over. You just need to work for them and find someone to hire you and pay you something to get that experience, rather than putting together piecemeal work or getting a job as a contract attorney and sitting around waiting for a call at 8 in the morning. doesn't make any sense. I think you can highlight it, but I also think you should just take the advice I've given and try to get a real job. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just trying to show you. And you will get a real job when you're willing to accept the amount of money that these law firms are willing to pay, and then work your way up is what I'd recommend. Okay, yeah. So you should stay away from people that are saying negative things about your firm. If you associate with them and you get involved with that, they will use your statements against you or tell other people what you said. They are negative and they are not going to get ahead in your firm. It's nice to connect, but if you were in high school and you decided you wanted to smoke pot and do drugs on the weekends with your friends, you would end up and drink all weekend. You would end up being friends with a certain type of people. And ultimately, you would be defined by that. People would say, oh, she's a stoner, he's a stoner. And you're defined by the people you're around. So I don't think that makes a lot of sense. I think you should ignore those sorts of things and try to avoid people that are like that. And you should be friends and socialize with people that are doing well. It's like that everywhere. If you associate with people that are doing well, then good things will tend to happen to you. If you associate with people that aren't doing well, then bad things will happen to you. I'll tell you a quick story. When I was in my freshman year of college, there were two fraternities, and I went to University of Chicago, so these are not like fraternities like you would think of at a state school or something. There were two of them. And the fraternity that I ended up joining was basically like a fraternity where everyone smoked and drank and used drugs. And then the other fraternity that wanted me to join was this fraternity that was the exact opposite. And everyone there was a great student and studied together. And the people from that fraternity went on to be some of the most successful people in the country, with like these huge Wikipedia pages talking about how they were head of Goldman Sachs and all this stuff. And the one that I joined, several of the people committed suicide. I was in a very small, because they were on a different track. And I'm not early in their life, later when they were in their 40s and late 30s, literally like, 20% of the people that I knew were just gone. So the kind of people, and I'm not saying it was a bad fraternity, there were a lot of really good things about it. And that wasn't the kind of style of life I had, but I was comfortable around those kind of people because I knew those kind of people in high school, and it was just easier than anyway. But so the kind of people you spend your time with really have a lot to do with how successful you are. If you avoid negative people, then you won't be seen as someone that thinks that. Because if there's 5 or 6 people that sit around gossiping about the firm and talking negative people and are negative, and the firm sees you socializing with them, even if you're not negative, the law firm's going to assume that you're negative like them, because they will know 1 or 2 of those people are negative, and they'll know what you're doing. So you want to be in a position where you're talking with people that are supporting the firm as opposed to bringing it down. So it's called antisocial or negative people. There's always negative people, and there's always positive people. And then there's kind of people that don't get involved at all. I would recommend being people that don't get involved at all, or people that are positive and support the firm, because all that kind of behavior just drags down the firm. You're biting the hand that's feeding you. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. I would be very careful with those types of people and associated with them. Yeah, that's a good point. I believe most training really, and I think that's great. You want to work in the office. Most training happens face to face. There's posture, there's facial expressions, there's closing doors or opening doors or sign and things you hear in the background. There's so much that goes into being around partners that are actually in the office and talking to you. Also, from the standpoint of advancement, those kind of in-person relationships are very important. I understand completely what you're thinking. It's certainly, and partners, by the way, I have partners approach me that are concerned that their office is too remote and they want to move firms. So it's not just associates that experience it, it's also partners. So I really would recommend that if you don't like the remote nature of the work, that honestly is possibly a good reason to move. You should also watch what's happening at the firm, meaning if people are making partner or not making partner that are working remotely, then that's a sign that it's a good or bad thing. But yeah, the working remotely can be a difficult thing, I think, for you to get ahead sometimes. Sorry for some of these people that ask questions early that I'm just answering. For some reason, I was doing the ones at the end. Okay, so this is the same thing. So I think I covered this. It's okay if you didn't get an offer. It's absolutely okay. It's okay if you didn't get a job in OCI. Now, OCI this is a good thing for everyone here. You should not rely exclusively on OCI. So if you're doing OCI and you went at a top law school, the law school is typically going to funnel certain types of people to certain firms in OCI. And OCI, if they asked you about your 1L and you didn't get a job or however that happened, that doesn't matter. Most people, by the way, they're 1Ls. The firm doesn't make offers to 1Ls. They just give them summer jobs. Not everyone gets an offer, which is perfectly fine. But I would define entry-level opportunities. Obviously, going to a good law school makes you very marketable. So I would recommend that you do whatever you can to try to get a position now in a law firm. So you may need to, if you were at a position where you could get a job before at an AmLaw 100 law firm because of your law school, you may just need to apply to 3 firms and then move up to a 4th firm after you get a couple of years of experience. The reason this is really relevant is because when you come out of law school, the only thing law firms have to evaluate you on is your school, grades, and summer employment. There's really not much else they can evaluate you with when they're hiring you. And that's it. So, but then when you have maybe 2 years of experience, it's going to be your school, current job, and most importantly, your practice area. So the practice area is a big deal. The practice area means you may be maybe only 5% of people in your market, or maybe one in 25 people are in your practice area and geographic region, right? So you're suddenly more marketable if you're in the right practice area. So that's really what matters after a year or 2 of experience geography. So that's really what matters. So your practice area is hugely important. If you were a corporate attorney at a 3 firm, you could move to a top 4 firm. If you were a litigator at a top 3 firm, you can move to a 4 firm. So all this stuff is what happens when you do that. So your practice area becomes most important, not necessarily the firm you're at. Okay, if someone has a health or other issue that we're doing an internship, how can they talk about it to their potential employer without affecting their chance of getting a job? This is a very kind of hard question. So people have psychological breakdowns, they have surgeries, and I don't know, there's all sorts of things that happen to people. The problem is anytime you portray any type of weakness, it can hurt you. So what would a weakness be? Maybe you were hospitalized or had to go away for alcoholism. I don't know, I'm just making it up. Or you were too stressed out by law school and had to, it's just so all this stuff really, anytime something like that happens, you're almost better off not discussing it, because if you portray weaknesses anytime, it's not that the law firms are discriminating, it's just that they will potentially use that against you, and it just will affect everything. So it's not the end of the world that to do that. You just don't talk about it. You just say, most of the time they're not going to ask you. Again, all that matters when an employer is interviewing, I just want to keep coming back to this, is the law firm will hire you when your value exceeds what they're paying. So these are all business decisions, and your value is lessened to the extent there's things in your background that it doesn't like, which means your grades or your lack of a summer job. So it just means you have to move down a little bit before you move up. There's nothing wrong with having had a health or other issue. The only problem is when you say these things, and again, I'm not trying to be discriminatory or say anything wrong, but they're asking, will you do the job long term? And if that's a little bit of a risk, if risk to the firm, if you have problems, you have issues that others don't. That's all. It's important to understand that, that you really never want to talk about things that are negative, because if you do, the law firm may use it. It's just, you have to be careful, because the law firm ultimately wants to hire the person that it believes is going to be the best fit. Sorry, I'm just going to... Okay, so sorry, I think this is one of the last question. There's maybe a few more. But, okay, so what do you recommend when you have months waiting for the bar result? So law firms will interview you while waiting for you to pass. I would recommend you spend the time looking for a job. And then some of the time they'll hire you right away. Like they hire people that are summer associates, regardless of whether they pass bar. That's called a law clerk. So law clerk doesn't have the bar yet. So that's fine. So you should be, what do you recommend when you have months of waiting bar results is basically, I recommend you search for jobs if you don't have them. Okay. This is follow-up. Sorry. If anyone has any follow-up questions about these, I'm almost done. So I'm happy to do my own. I'm just figuring this question. Because following my previous question, during the LLM business law and ADR, I asked the law school to waive some of the required courses for business law so I could take bar-related courses, which I did not take during my JD. Oh, that's smart. Okay, nice job. Okay, that was very smart. So you can compare. The law school waived the required business law course since I took them during my JD. Should I completely remove the LM from my resume? No, you shouldn't. You can leave it on there. You should never lie. You should leave it on there. You could just say LLM from the school and not say what it's in. You can leave it on there. Sometimes people will get LLMs and they'll get them from very prestigious schools. So I've seen people literally go to unaccredited California law schools that have a 5% bar pass rate. I'm not kidding, maybe 10, but just very bad schools, and wind up getting an LLM from Harvard Law School and a job in a major New York law firm in California. This happens. There's nothing wrong, but if you get an LLM from a good school, you should be proud of it. And I would say more like business law than ADR. That would probably be more appropriate to say business law, and don't say business law and ADR, just that you wanted to understand how businesses work. And that's actually okay. That's good. One of the things that's very interesting is people that go to get MBAs after getting law degrees are very marketable. Firms respect it. If you make it that, people will think you have a business background, you understand things, and you're able to identify with business clients. So I don't honestly see anything wrong with that at all. Oh, this is the LLM, the International Business and Economics Law. Yeah, that's fine. I think there's nothing wrong with that. They may ask you like why you did it and think it's a little, but other than that, okay, so this is another question. I'm almost done with these questions. Where would I fit in as a student who worked full-time, went to school full-time and did not do a law firm internship, but yeah, that's fine. This is all great. Sometimes people work full-time, and that law firms actually respect that you may have had to support a family or you wanted to pay for law school. They respect that because it shows motivation, shows you want to be an attorney. You have these questions up here where we talked about earlier. Can you do the job? Can you commit to the job? Can you be managed? Yes. If you were able to commit to a full-time job while you were working, yes. Can you be managed? Yes. You're working for other people. Do you want the job? Yes. You've sacrificed all this stuff to become an attorney. And then do we like you? Yes. We love your struggle and everything you did. So all that's very positive, and law firms would like that. Okay, so this is a good question. I'll answer this one too. Are there particular practice area and types of law firms that might be more open to hire candidates without traditional positions, and how can I identify and target? Yes, those are these firms, the small business consumer firms that represent individuals and clients with a lot of money. They do not typically have any types of summer programs, and they hire people when they pass the bar, and they hire them at all different salaries. You could make 60,000 at one, you can make 150,000 another. You just need to apply to all of them. That's a great question, but it's typically law firms that are consumer facing or mid-sized law firms that may never have summer programs and do all their hiring laterally. Most law firms in the United States, by the way, like 95% of them do not have summer associate jobs. You can work in a firm during the summer and they just call you a law clerk, and then you can try to get a job after. That's how that works. There's another question. Sorry, I'm asking questions a lot. Okay. I'm trying to answer everything because I want to help everyone here. There seem to be a lot of IP litigation jobs open to people with 2+ years of IP or litigation experience at the moment. I have a science background, a master's in biomedical engineering, and published pharmacology work, but I did not pursue litigation after law school. I got my master's after law school to make myself more marketable, and IP as an undergraduate biology degrees aren't highly desirable. Towards the end of my degree, when my lab was closing, I took a role as a research attorney in-house because I was recruited at the right time and I needed a job with less extreme hours while finishing my master's. Okay. I did specialize in corporate law and IP while in that role, but I obviously did not litigate. Okay, let me just see. I did complete a patent litigation practicum and an IP practicum, mixed transaction litigation in law school, but that was several years ago. Is there a way to break into these roles despite not having firm litigation experience? What angle would you take? Okay, let me just understand. So undergraduate degree, you got your master's after law school. I don't know what you got. You're a master's in biomedical engineering. Okay, so that's a good question. Biotech, patent prosecution, and things that involve that, those jobs are harder to get inside of law firms than jobs they're calling for electrical engineer, physics, and that sort of thing. So that's one of the things that you're facing. Some markets, by the way, that are good for biomedical type stuff would be San Diego, Boston, the Bay Area to some extent. So there are markets for that, and there's nothing wrong with your experience. But all you need to do to get a position, this is very common for patent attorneys. I'm assuming you took the patent bar. So if you took the patent bar, you just need to start at smaller firms, which would be like 3 firms, or firms that will give you experience. The nice thing about patent is there are hundreds, tens of thousands of small patent firms, and you can apply to them, just as I showed you using Google. You can find them, and you can find firms that do that type of work. They may not have a lot of work for you, but at the same time, you can try to work there. They may not pay a lot, but they may be interested in training you, and they will. So you find those firms just by doing Google searches for different cities and things of people doing it, or even attorneys that went to your law school and you just take every possible way you can and apply to as many places as you can, basically saying you really want the experience. Some of those firms will also do patent litigation, but you need to call in a lot of places. And the only other thing I would say is that this is a little bit scary, but compared to patent prosecution in the hard sciences, many times they want patent prosecutors in the life sciences to have PhDs compared to just master's degrees in the hard sciences. It's difficult. It's more difficult to get jobs at patent firms doing patent litigation, doing biotech stuff, but you just need to apply to smaller places. Again, as I said earlier, most patent prosecutors, because they're their science backgrounds, don't go to the top law schools because there's big curves and things in biology and sciences, and they don't have the top grades, and they're not necessarily trained verbally for reading comprehension and all these things that they talk about in the LSAT. So they almost always start out at small firms. So you just need to start at a small firm. When you get the experience at a small firm, you can always move to a bigger firm. But that's what I would recommend. You don't want to harp on, you shouldn't be defining yourself at this point in all these schools and practicums and things. You should be trying to turn that into practical, meaning getting a job. And that's one of the problems of people that are way too academic in the legal field, is the law firms want to see, okay, you know this stuff, now get to work. And they're not theoretical. Professors, by the way, in law schools typically don't make good attorneys because they're too theoretical and focused on education, and they don't, law firms require kind of boom, doing work. So that's what I would recommend there. I think that you should do whatever you can to get a job in a small firm and then move from there into a larger firm. All right, and I hope that helps. Thanks everyone for being on this webinar. Great questions today. Next week, I think I'm going to do a much more in-depth presentation of things. This is a good one, but things to how to position yourself to get a better job in a law firm. I was going to actually do that today, but that wasn't the webinar that was announced, so I went with this one. But yeah, everyone who asked questions today, thank you. These questions are very helpful because they show you the frame of mind you need to be in and the decisions you need to make to get a position. Unfortunately, it looks like I do not have the ability to message everyone. I would like that in this webinar. So what I'm going to try to do is, if you registered on the webinar, I will send you these links that I think are important for you to read. This Dropbox one being the book, so you understand a little bit better how law firms are looking at you. And I'll send that out hopefully as a mass email without putting people's email address in there today or tomorrow. Thanks a lot, everyone, for being on the webinar. And thanks for the questions. And talk to everyone next week.